housing shortage. And see, that is the problem. Prices are going up because there is a housing shortage. And you're going to hear more and more talk now to try to explain away inflation and say that the reason prices are going up is because we have these shortages. Because nobody in the government wants to accept responsibility for the price increases, right? Because the real problem is not that we have a shortage of goods. It's that we have a surplus of money, right? That is the problem. I mean, we don't have an unlimited supply of goods. We never do. In fact, the basic definition of economics is really how to satisfy unlimited demand with limited resources. But what the government is doing with all this money printing is they're artificially stimulating demand. People now have a lot more money to go out and buy stuff, but people aren't going into the economy and producing the stuff. So we have all this money, this huge money supply, but there's not goods for people to use to buy. So all you can do is bid up prices. But it's always going to look like a shortage of supply whenever you have a lot of money. I mean, think about it from this perspective. What if the U.S. government decided to up the size of the stimulus checks? What if they decided to send everybody $1 million, right? Just one big check. Let's make everybody a millionaire, right? That should really boom this economy if everybody in America was a millionaire, right? Wouldn't we have a strong economy if we were all millionaires? Okay, great. So let's give everybody a check for $1 million. Now, would it surprise anybody if we actually did this? If all of a sudden there were news reports of shortages of Ferraris or Porsches or Lamborghinis, right? All these expensive exotic sports cars, all of a sudden there'd be big shortages of these cars because everybody would be a millionaire. And so everybody would want to buy these expensive sports cars. But clearly there's not enough to go around. And so the politicians would say, hey, we've got a shortage of Ferraris. We have a shortage of Porsches. No, we don't. We would have a surplus of millionaires. That's the problem. You see, there's not enough Porsches and Ferraris and Lamborghinis for everybody to have one because it's very expensive to produce them. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of labor, a lot of skill. That's why they're so expensive, because you can't make many of them. So if we just give a bunch of people money and now they all want to buy those cars, it's impossible for them all to have them. So what has to happen is the price of those cars now has to rise to find a new equilibrium so that roughly the same number of cars ends up getting sold, but they just get sold at a much, much higher price point. So now all these new millionaires, they're not going to have Ferraris. They're not going to have Maseratis. They're going to buy a Ford or a GM car. They're going to buy the same cars they bought before, except now they're going to pay much higher prices for those because everybody has all this money. You know, what if the government gave everybody $100 million, right? Whoa, no, now there's shortages of yachts. There's shortages of private jets, right? Everybody wants to buy a private jet, but there's not enough to go around. Of course there's not enough to go around. It is impossible. So the government, though, is going to hide behind this supply shortage myth to try to deflect responsibility for inflation and rising prices. Now, yes, in part, you are seeing the result of the fact that a lot of people during COVID were locked down at home, so they weren't on the job helping to produce stuff. And I talked about that from the very beginning when COVID first started, that was going to happen. But the real problem is not that temporary backlog, but the permanent increase in the money supply. And, you know, a lot of the workers who were off the job in Asia and Europe, they're back at work now, right? It's Americans who have this perverse incentive not to go to work. So we're paying all of our workers to stay home, but that's not really happening so much in Asia. I mean, people are on the job. The problem is you can't create enough products to satisfy this huge increase in the amount of money that non-productive Americans now have. In fact, you know, earlier today, Walmart came out. I guess I had better than expected.